Well, it's Monday. All right, on today's show, more oil drama. I got a story about housing that goes against the narrative here in Canada. And then there are questions about employment here in Canada, and I compared it to the US, and we measure things differently, so I'm going to show you that. And a quick tidbit that still confuses me. But first, point of business, if you like my content, please like, follow, and share. And if you or someone you know would like to work with me, the link is in the bio. All right, yesterday I asked the question, is it Dalhousie or Dalhousie? And in the comments, people were correcting me saying it was Dalhousie. But I grew up in Niagara near Port Dalhousie. Lakeside Park, made famous by Rush, in Port Dalhousie. Dalhousie, Dalhousie. English is a strange language, and we wonder why immigrants can often be confused. All right, this happened in oil over the weekend, and as I've said many times, if something like this happens, you got to go looking at the news because something is going on. This is going on. OPEC Plus fails to deliver on output pledge. OPEC Plus had said that they were increasing production 411,000 barrels per day for May, but in real world terms, it didn't materialize. That said, there's still a global surplus expected this summer. What's going on? Well, they did say that increase, at least the first one, was to bring the quota in line with the actual production. So that 411,000 barrels per day is just the difference between the quota they had in place and the production that was already happening. So it's not a surprise that 411,000 additional barrels per day did not show up on the market. But that almost guarantees they're going to keep at it. OPEC Plus is after market share, and their advantage is that their cost of production is lower than producers in the West. So they're going to drive that price down until the margin gets squeezed just enough to put those other producers on hold or out of business. All right, there's a report out that's slamming changes in regulations to construction as housing prices jump 20%. It's in the Netherlands, with Dutch housing prices surging nearly 20% in some cities and 10% nationwide. A new government commission report due on Friday will recommend slashing over-the-top building regulations to accelerate construction. Sound familiar? Man, that Justin Trudeau, he got around. I've said it a million times before. The housing problem is a global issue. There's either an increase in the cost of housing or a population growth problem. Why? Cost of materials have gone up. Cost of good land has gone up. It's a global problem. This is why I scoff at localized solutions to fixing the affordability issue. The fact of the matter is that all across the West for decades now, wages have not kept up to the cost of living. Wages have not kept up to the cost of construction. We blame the Canadian government as if it's only happening here, but it's not only happening here. If you think the problem with real estate is localized, zoom out. All right, I was critical of the Bank of Canada holding rates steady, saying that our unemployment was too high. We were at 7%, the US is at 4.2%, they held, and we held. And some said, well, we measure it differently. And that's true. Unemployment rate for the United States and Canada adjusted to US concepts. For April, our unemployment rate, if we measured the same as the US, would be 5.8%. We went up 0.1% from April to May. So our unemployment for May, measured the same as the US, would be 5.9%. The US was at 5.9% in 2014. They were still recovering from the great financial collapse. Their interest rate was 0.25%, and they kept that employment growing. Now, we have traditionally been close to the US, about a 1% spread, using the same system. We tightened up in 2022, and this is why we had that big immigration spike. It was because the labor market had tightened up. People were going to ask for more money. But now the spread is pretty close to 2%. They're at 4.2%. We, adjusted, would be at 5.9%. Right? If you round that off, that's 4% to 6%. It's almost 2% difference. Too big. Too big of a difference. We need to get people back to work. Also, there's a shitstorm coming. The bond yields are going up for the US, right? That's the 30-year bond. And as I've said, the bond yields go up as the bond prices go down. And the US is going to auction off a whole bunch of bonds this week. And people might not buy them, right? Because why would you buy new bonds coming from the government if you can get a better return buying bonds in the open market? So the US is going to try and sell $22 billion worth of debt when the bond market is saying that's a bad bet. Cracks are forming and people aren't connecting the dots. They'll be connecting the dots soon enough.